my focus shifted from poor me to, oh, I've got to write 5 things in my journal tonight. And I, first of all, started looking for them. But secondly, I started voicing my gratitude in a way that I'd never probably even thought of before. And this started to completely shift my mindset around gratitude and what an extremely powerful practice it is. And it was kind of the first foundational shift, which is why it's the first thing that I teach in Happiness Baseline, the first big foundational shift for me in working with my mindset.
Stay connected to gratitude. Hit the follow button right now and join thousands of listeners tuning in each week. We're the Gratitude Seekers. Come join us. Hi, Gratitude Seeker. Welcome to a new episode of the Gratitude Podcast. Our guest today is a happiness strategist who teaches students and corporations around the world how to master their lives. She has spent the last 25 years studying the mind and its relationship to happiness and suffering. Over 70 universities and colleges use her program, The 10-Minute Mind. In 2010, Monique received a nomination for the prestigious New Zealander of the Year award. She's an insatiable world traveler. She spends time between LA and her homeland, New Zealand, and now she's here with us to talk about happiness and gratitude with us. Monique Rhodes, welcome to the Gratitude Podcast.
So wonderful to be here with you, Georgianne. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And thanks again for doing this at such an odd hour for you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate what you said before about giving it your best, even though.
It's all good. This is the practice of the mind, isn't it? To see how am I at all times of the day.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I'm saying this because I've seen it. I've seen this myself, that in the morning I'm usually most energetic. So it's good that it's in the morning here and I have more energy, because I see that as the day goes on and I'm using some of the resources, I tend to be less resourceful at the end of the day. So yeah, I appreciate that. So let us know a little bit more about you, about your work. It's fascinating, and I'm sure that our listeners want to find out more as well.
Sure. Well, Georgianne, it's probably the best thing I can do is just tell you a little bit about my story, because that will put everything into context. I grew up in New Zealand. I know that we're the envy of the world right now for a lot of reasons, for our Prime Minister, for our COVID response, and also for the incredibly beautiful country that we have here that many of your listeners would have seen on things like The Lord of the Rings. It's very, very beautiful. A really wonderful, wonderful country. But there's always a shadow side to everything that's wonderful. And unfortunately for New Zealand, we have a high rate of child abuse, something that's been studied, and there's a myriad of reasons why it's such a problem here. And unfortunately, I'm one of the statistics from that. I was adopted at the age of 10 days old into a family that I'm only going to describe as being problematic. And, in my teenage years, I really struggled. I'm pretty sure, looking back now, I was struggling quite badly with depression. And then by the age of 19, things kind of came to a head. I'd left home at 17. I was struggling. I just remember that my emotions were all over the place. I never quite knew how I was going to be from one hour to the next. And around that time, I got myself into a situation where I intentionally took an overdose to try and take my own life. And I wasn't successful, thank goodness. And I remember sitting in the hospital in recovery and thinking to myself, why is it that life is just so incredibly hard for me? And why is it that for a lot of other people, it doesn't seem to be that difficult? And it made me wonder whether there was the possibility of being able to turn things around. If I could figure out what the difference was between me and other people. And I think more than anything, Georgianne, to try and find out whether it was something that was movable or was it something that, we were each born with. And so I went on a journey for the next 25 years, discovering as much as I could, like all over the world. I've traveled all over the world and looked at different philosophies, different ways of being, and studied as much as I possibly could to see, could I turn my life around? And I'm really proud to say that I have, and that my life has, had a 180-degree shift, and that transformation is completely possible. And I think one of the biggest things I learned was that it wasn't something that was concrete. The suffering wasn't something that was immovable. It was something that I was actually able to shift and change. I just needed to find and discover the right tools to be able to do it. And so now this is what I teach, because I, on some levels, find it really painful that so many of us don't know how we can actually turn our lives around. And I think that it's really important to be taught some of the skills that I teach.
Most definitely. And I'm sure that there are many people that have been in a similar situation, or maybe are in a similar situation. And they can't find, or haven't found yet, a way of dealing with this. What was the main idea that changed your life? Like, was it a certain moment or a certain situation that got you to make the decision?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the biggest thing that I learned was that I'd spent my whole life believing that I needed to change my external circumstances for my life to change. And I think the biggest thing that I realized was that it was actually an internal change that needed to happen. And once I started to shift internally, then the external circumstances started to shift. And no one had ever told me that. We're always led to believe that we need to try and control our environment. But actually, it's our mind that we need to train or to tame. And if we can learn to work with the mind and understand that the mind is the ordering principle, and that happiness and suffering come from the mind, then there's an incredible liberation that happens, because we begin to understand all of a sudden that it's not a roll of the dice whether or not we can be happy. It's not whether we're wealthy. It's not whether we meet the right person or are lucky enough to get the most fantastic job. Actually, none of those things will have a long-term effect on our happiness. What will have a long-term effect on our happiness is how we are with our mind, and whether we have our mind trained in any way or whether it's wild. And if it's wild, we're probably going to suffer. But if we can learn to work with it and understand it and get to know ourselves and kind of rein it in, then we have much, much greater opportunity to master ourselves and master our own happiness.
Definitely. This makes so much sense, and it's right on point with the work we're doing here with gratitude. We believe the same thing, and it's been, in my experience, an important part of the change to know that what's going on inside is actually much more important than what's going on outside. And since we're talking about gratitude, I'm really curious how you define it. What is gratitude for you personally?
I'm not sure how I define it, Georgian, but I certainly know how I practice it. And I have quite a specific way that I teach the practice of gratitude, because I think that we really live in a world that's constantly putting us in a place of feeling that nothing is ever enough and that we're certainly never enough. So I'm a real believer in the practice of gratitude being not only about the things that happen for us or the things that we have that we may not actually realize or appreciate, but also gratitude for ourselves, that we use gratitude as a way to combat the almost brainwashing that we get from media, social media, and advertising, which is basically designed to tell us that we're not enough so that we'll buy products. And I teach a course called the Happiness Baseline, which is an 8-week online course teaching people how to be happier. And the first week we work with gratitude practices. But for me, and I don't know how you teach it, Georgian, but for me, I have something very specific in the way that I teach gratitude, and that is that as well as being grateful, that the word because becomes the vital anchor. I'm grateful for this or that because when we use that word because, we start to go into the feeling and the experience of what it is that we're grateful for. And I almost feel like it turbocharges the practice. I could sit here and say, I'm grateful that it was a beautiful day in New Zealand here today where I'm hiding out from COVID. I could say that. But even more powerfully, I can say, I'm really grateful that it was a beautiful day today because it lifts my spirits. And all of a sudden, I'm moving into an emotional experience of that gratitude rather than a logical experience of it. And I find that a really powerful way to create a daily gratitude practice, which I practice every day, that has, even more meaning and almost goes right into my being rather than just sitting in my head.
Yeah, definitely. This is a game changer. And I think it's very powerful because most people know about gratitude and about gratitude lists or journals. And it's similar to what we're told about saying thank you. The fact that we're told to say thank you and to be polite, but we're not taught to actually feel it. I think it's similar, and this is similar to when we are actually doing the gratitude practice, when we're just doing it with our mind and we're just listing things. Of course, the results aren't that great, and I think many people that hear about gratitude just practice it in that way, and many don't find it like it's a really useful practice because they don't actually get the whole benefits of practicing gratitude, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also, Georgian, the idea, I guess, for me with gratitude is connecting into everything. Often when we start our practices in the happiness baseline, and I'll get people to write 5 things every day that they're grateful for. And sometimes people will come to me and say, because they have to write something different every day, those 5 things have to be different. Sometimes people will come and say, I can't think of anything. And it's really powerful to start to look at every single thing in your life as a source of gratitude. If I was just to be sitting here with you in New Zealand, and I look around this room, I could say 100 gratitudes just from the things that, my eyes land on. And so I think it's such a powerful practice for us to start to see the abundance that we have. And all of a sudden, life becomes this gift-giving, magical kind of place because we're starting to look through different eyes. And as we look through different eyes, we start to understand that there's just so much for us to be grateful for. But again, these are things that are not taught to us, when we're kids. And not something that, I don't know, many families that sat down at the dinner table and, everyone went round and said what they were grateful for. But how powerful is it when we actually do these practices? Because not only do we start to see the things that bring us joy or the things that, we start to become grateful for, but we also see what other people are grateful for. And one of the practices that I'll get a couple in a relationship to do if they're having, some kind of struggles, one of the first things is that every day they sit down, they do their gratitude practices, they tell each other what their gratitudes were, and then they say at least, but ideally 3 things about the other person that they're grateful for. And then it's almost like opening a portal to a whole bunch of, bits of understanding. Maybe you don't realize that your partner really appreciates you doing a particular thing. And when they tell you, you start to see, oh, this is something that feels loving for them. So even in a relationship, I see how that practice of gratitude can be so incredibly powerful and bring deeper communication and understanding quite quickly, and positivity as well, and love. It kind of opens everything up.
Yeah, definitely, because what's actually closing things up is resentment, is the fact that we see the faults, we see the bad things, and we tend to close up or to get into fights or things of this nature. But when we see the whole picture and we realize that we are in a relationship with that person because there are so many things that are great about that person and about that relationship, and when we bring that up, it's a whole nother story. And I feel that we all deserve this, or all of our relationships deserves this kind of treatment and this kind of appreciation, because we live in relationships and they are very important for us, and they can make the difference between having a good life, a life that we love and appreciate, and a life that's hard and complicated. But I'm also curious if you want to share with us whether or not you were always a grateful person, and if not, when did you discover gratitude? Like the one you feel, not just the concept, the idea of gratitude.
Yeah, it's a great question, Georgian. I think that I certainly wasn't always a grateful person. I think that I was very similar to, a lot of people, and felt a little bit victimized in my life, and which is a very easy place for us to get into when difficult things have happened to us. And all of a sudden we, sit in this victim role and feel as though the world is incredibly difficult. But I remember it about the age of, I was probably about 20 years old, and I left New Zealand and I went to Thailand. And I remember going down this canal into this very poor area of Thailand. And there was a man, I'll never ever forget him. And he was sitting under a tarpaulin that had 4 bamboo poles that were, that he was sitting under it. And he had a few belongings next to him, and that was his home. And I remember seeing this man, and the purity of joy on his face was completely confusing to me. It was like, hey, I don't get this. Like, how is it that this man is so full of joy? It was the first time I'd been to a third world country. And I was almost haunted by him. And it really got me going down a path of starting to think, wait a second, I've kind of been taught that, if we're going to be happy, we need a series of things to make us happy. And certainly living under a tarpaulin and 4 bamboo poles is not the formula for being happy. And I began to realize that actually perhaps I had been misled in how things really work. And I began to understand that it wasn't about how much I had, it was my relationship to what I had that counted. And this led me to, for 13 years, I traveled all over the world. Actually, I traveled for 4 years on a motorbike through India by myself and lived, with some of the poorest communities in India and saw so much joy and happiness. Of course, I saw hardship as well. But I started to realize that the psychological hardship of people in the West was possibly more painful than the physical hardships that some people in third world countries were facing. And so a few years after I saw this man in Thailand, I remember watching an Oprah Winfrey episode. And there was this woman that came on with this gratitude journal. I think it was the first time this idea of gratitude journals was kind of exposed on any sort of big medium into the world. And I started writing a gratitude journal, and I found that it was just so incredible, because what I discovered was that I was going through my day and my focus had shifted. My focus shifted from poor me to, I've got to write 5 things in my journal tonight. And I, first of all, started looking for them. But secondly, I started voicing my gratitude in a way that I'd never probably even thought of before. And this started to completely shift my mindset around gratitude and what an extremely powerful practice it is. And it was kind of the first foundational shift, which is why it's the first thing that I teach in the Happiness Baseline, the first big foundational shift for me in working with my mindset. Of course, the garden has to be weeded, but things that are a little bit more difficult. And I think that sowing the seeds of joy through gratitude practice is an incredibly powerful way to get yourself into a mindset that you can actually deal with things that are difficult.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said, and it's amazing the picture that you painted for us, and I think somehow it represents gratitude in a way. The fact that that person, that man, didn't have much, and he was so joyful and so appreciative of what he had, and the fact that this is what we actually want. This is what we want to get to that state. And that state, we thought, and I think, of course, the media and everything that we see on Instagram and everywhere leads to that. We think that there are different things that we need to have in order for us to actually feel that way. And when you see something like that, the fact that that man was in that state that we all want or strive for, without all of the things that we're taught we need for that. Yeah, I can imagine how much of a shock it was, and it's wonderful how the universe speaks to us in different ways that are meaningful for us. I think that's amazing. But I also wanted to get to something that you shared that I think it's amazing. You said that you rode through India for 4 years on a motorcycle. What were some things that you learned from the simple people that you met regarding gratitude? Like if you've seen some practices or some cultural differences that were interesting for you from the point of view of gratitude?
I think the biggest thing that I saw, Georgian, was a kindness that I had probably never seen before. I remember one day being on my bike and I wanted to buy some spray paint to paint the carriers on my bike. And I pulled into a gas station and I asked the gas station where this paint shop was. And I remember there was a man there on his motorbike and he said, "Follow me and I'll show you." And he rode for 20 minutes out of his way to show me this place for nothing other than just being kind and being connected to another human being. I was often invited to people's homes who were unbelievably poor, whose poverty, was extreme. And their desire to give something to me was so big, even if it was just a little bit of food and for me to share a meal with them. And I think that it made me understand more than anything that, it's all about connection, and that it's nothing to do with how much or how little we have, but it's actually about that connection. And of course, some finances and some money make a difference. I'm not about to deny that, but that's only to a certain degree. And then after that, it's really about the connections that we make with each other. And when we're able to really look someone in the eye who's just fed us from the small amount they have and thank them from our heart, or to thank the man who drove 20 minutes out of his way from my heart, because I think that's a powerful practice, because being genuine, authentic, and completely present with someone in the moment was the only way that I could repay that particular kind of kindness. And it taught me to be extremely present whenever it was that I wanted to thank someone, because that was the gift in return. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense, and I totally resonate with that. And it's just wonderful. Going through the way I'm imagining your experience in my own head, it's just amazing, and I can only imagine how touching it was. For instance, to get you 20 minutes away from the road that they had to the paint shop, and just knowing that there are people out there doing this, and the fact that they did it without having any reason to do so, just makes me think about pronoia, the fact that good things are happening to us and for us, and the fact that we are in a beautiful world, and there are amazing people, and lots of reasons to feel grateful. And I love that perspective, because it's a really beautiful way of seeing things that's in contrast with what we see on TV usually,
Absolutely. It was interesting. About a week ago, I was with a group of my students, and I got each of them to relay. I got them to sit for a moment, and I said to them, I want each of you to think of a time in your life when someone was kind to you. And I want you to, could be from any time in your life. And it was really interesting, Georgian, because each one of them came back with, no one came back saying, I was bought this, or I was taken to this place. every single one was an unexpected kindness where the other person didn't seem to want anything in return. And it's interesting because, you know, in my life, there's lots of things that I've been gifted, but the gift of that man driving 20 minutes out of his way is something that I will never forget. That's the gift that makes the big impact. And if you said to me, you know, what are the greatest gifts you've ever received? That would probably be in my top 10 without a question, because it was so unexpected. It was for no desire for anything but just genuinely to love another human being. And I felt it. And each of my students told a similar story to me. And I found that incredibly powerful.
That's amazing. And what I love about gratitude in this case is that it helps us remember, relive that moment. And we are reliving that moment with you right now. And we're feeling the gratitude that you felt to some degree, of course, even though it's not our experience. It's not something that we experience directly, but just by you sharing that with us and sharing your gratitude, we get to feel that. And I think that's amazing that we're able to do this.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Georgian. It also makes me think of something at the moment, you know, with the pandemic happening right at this particular moment that I'm talking to you. We're just finally starting to get COVID here in New Zealand, and it's starting to take off. And it's really interesting because we understand that, like the rest of the world, the supply chain is going to be affected. And I was speaking to my sister the other day, who's a teacher at school, and, you know, I said to her, one of the most powerful things that you have the ability right now to show the kids that you teach in your class is how interconnected everything is, and that they may think that their meal just arrives on their plate, but now you have the opportunity to show them all the people that they can be grateful for who have got them to this place, you know, even to the people who made the plates and drove the trucks and made the roads. You know, I always love going down that rabbit hole of gratitude, of all the people you can be grateful for. And I think that those subtle things, I think we always imagine that our gratitude should be for kind of bigger things, but actually the reasons for gratitude everywhere, but we need to turn our eye to them, which is why the work that you're doing is so powerful and so important. Because if we can turn our eye to what we're able to be grateful for, it's almost like going from black and white into technicolor, you know? It's what it feels like. It feels like all of a sudden everything takes on a vibrancy, because we start to see that there's just so much reason for us to be grateful, rather than feeling as though we're victims to the circumstances that are happening out of our control in the wider world. The only place we can really affect is our circle of influence. And our circle of influence is everywhere that our eyes can see, or our ears can hear, or our bodies can touch. And then we become powerful.
Exactly. Firstly, thank you so much for your kind words about the work that I'm doing. I really appreciate that, and it means a lot to me. And yeah, I totally agree. It's so empowering, and there's so much more that we can do when we are empowered, when we are aware of this, rather than just react to different things that are happening that are out of our control. And I think this is a beautiful gift that we've been given, and that we can use for ourselves to enjoy a more beautiful experience of life, and also for others to be an example, to be a person that influences other people in a positive way by by having a different kind of perspective. And yeah, I think you're such a person, and I'm really happy that we got together and we did this interview. So thank you so much for your time and for being here with us and for sharing this amazing story and nuggets of wisdom.
Thank you, Georgian, and thank you for being such a gracious host. And I was going to say to you, in the early morning, our brains are sharper, but I think in the evening, we're more mellow and contemplative. And I feel that's exactly where you took me tonight, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. I really love your perspective, and I think, yeah, it was perfect, actually.
Thank you, Georgian. Thank you for having me.
Hey, Gratitude Seeker, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this interview. I really appreciate it. And if you could think of one person that would also benefit from it, share it with them. It might actually be the inspiration that they need to make their day or maybe even their life much better. Thank you so much once again. This has been Georgian Benta. Don't forget to keep seeking and spreading gratitude.
You know that feeling when you're about to score 30% off, but they want your number? Ugh. Give them your Line 2 number instead. It's a second line on your phone, perfect for nabbing promo codes without inviting spam to your party. Sign up for every discount under the sun, then block the junk texts that follow. You get all the perks, but none of the spammy baggage. More codes, less chaos. Visit line2.com/audio or download Line 2 in the App Store and get your shopping sidekick today. Because the only thing blowing up your phone should be good deals.